What I want to know is this. There was a terrible, terrible terror attack upon two sisters. They were killed. They were buried earlier today. Their mother remains in critical condition in hospital. And Hamas has praised this terror attack, and they have said that this attack was in response in no small part to what they term Israel's ongoing crimes against Al-Aqsa. Now, I want to begin right there. Can you tell me, please, about recent activities by the Israeli National Police, Alon, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, what precipitated those, and most importantly, can you confirm or deny whether there has been any change whatsoever in the status quo with regard to Al-Aqsa on the part of the Israeli government?
I think we'll start with the end of your question. There is no change in the status quo regarding the Israeli government, the Israeli police, the Israeli army, and anyone involved in the Temple Mount or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Israeli government and the Israeli police are obligated to the freedom of pray, the freedom of people to go to Al-Aqsa and to pray, and the freedom of the Jewish people to go to the Western Wall and to pray and to go up the Temple Mount and visit the Temple Mount. So everything is the same. The pictures that we saw on television regarding the riots and the violence from the prayers in the mosque was a police work that had to be done because the prayers barricade inside the mosque with fireworks, with weapons, with rocks. That's not the way people who believe act in their holy place. The police had to take them out from the mosque, and that's the result. The pictures were not very well or very good in the public media, that's for sure, but it was a thing that has to be done. Regarding the terror attack in the Jordan Valley, it's something that it can't be described. It's not human. It's unbelievable. Terrorists that are killing in cold blood two young sisters in their car that did nothing to anyone, just driving their car, and to say that there is a connection between that and the riots or the act of the police in the Temple Mount, that's hilarious. It's a cynical way to put things, and it's only show you how cruel these people are. Killing two young girls in their car, wounded their mother. I think that there is no connection. It's only in their mind.
Now, you made mention of the fact that those who were at the Al-Aqsa Mosque were in there, needed to be dispersed because they were in possession of fireworks and so forth that they would have deployed. Now, these were thought to have been individuals and people readying themselves to attack Jews who would go to the Kotel or the Western Wall during Pesach. Can you tell us about why such an occurrence would be anticipated?
You have to understand how the Temple Mount is built. There are several mosques on top of the mountain, and the Western Wall is just beneath the Temple Mount. Mm-hmm. If people will gather in the Temple Mount next to the mosques, throw stones over the wall, it will hit the Jewish prayers, which are in huge numbers in these days because it's Pesach. People must understand that in Israel now and all over the world, it's Pesach, Passover, Pascha for the Christians, and Ramadan for the Muslims. The three holidays are in the same time, and the government and the police are doing all everything they can to let everyone go and fulfill their religious, habits or things that they must do. And it's very complicated. It was a very dangerous situation up in the mountain. The police did exactly what they had to do. Take these prayers. These terrorists that were barricaded inside the mosque, they also took hostage people from their own religious inside the mosque. They didn't let them go out. So actually, the police had to go in and take these people out, do some arrests. And I think the last few days shows that everything is a little bit calm. Things are getting better now.
And so just to let you know, Chuck, we're going to draw back the lens a little bit and talk about Lebanon and talk about Syria in just a few moments. But before coming to you, Chuck, I want to speak to you, David, about Hamas. So Hamas has again been...
But after David, I would like to respond to what Alon said.
Why don't you go now? No, Chuck, you go now.
It's okay.
No, go for it, because I want the order to be thorough. I want your comments to be in context. Please tell us what you're thinking.
Look, the fact that Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah are heinous terrorists, that these are despicable, murderous people, I don't think I have to say. That is clear. There is the old expression about being right, but not necessarily being smart. And there's a Hebrew expression that everything that Alon said was right and irrelevant to my way of thinking. We have known for weeks that something like this was going to happen. It has happened a couple of times over recent years, and we simply play into Hamas's hands. I do not accept that there was no choice but for the police to go in. And if they wanted to take hostages of their own, that's their problem, and they would have had to account to world opinion if they had done something afterwards. What the police should have done, in my humble opinion, and Alon is a much greater expert on this than I am, but in my humble opinion, what should have been done is simply to draw a line between the people in the mosque, the Jewish worshipers coming up to the Temple Mount, and if they want to stay in there, until they rot, for all I care. But what we have done is simply shot ourselves in the foot, not for the first time.
Thank you. So I actually really appreciate your comments, Chuck, and I, because of my own military experience, I'm going to defer to the operational expertise of Alon on this, and I want him to weigh in on that, because I know, Chuck, that you're very concerned about how this looks, how it plays out, the international ramifications, diplomatic ramifications, which I know Alon is very sensitive to as well. Alon, in your opinion, given what Chuck said, given that Chuck is someone who also despises, condemns, opposes all of the parties that all of us on this call oppose, do you think that there was a different way in which the Israeli National Police could have carried about that operation that would have created less of a firestorm internationally?
I agree with Chuck about the results. At the end, the pictures that the whole world saw over television and over the media were very bad pictures. I agree with that absolutely. But I think that, and I've been there many, many times with my uniforms and my helmet, and the situation there, it's like a war zone. You have to understand the people that barricade themselves in the mosque, shooting directly to the police officers, towards the police officers, these fireworks. They are throwing stones and everything that they have in their hands from the doors of the mosque outside. Sometimes you cannot reach the doors and to close them. And theoretically, I agree with you. Theoretically, it was the right thing to do a line and let them do whatever they want and let the Jewish people go up. But it's not really practical solution. It can't be done. I really understand that the pictures or the video films that they were taken there did a terrible, the results were terrible all over the world. And like you said, we play to their hands. But in an operational point of view, and I've been there so many times, there was no other option. I can tell you that the decision to go inside is at the highest ranks. It's the commander of the Jerusalem police district, and sometimes with after discussion with the commissioner himself, which is on the spot. I know them very well. They are friends of mine. They are there. They are not sending their troops inside without being there. And everybody knows that it's very, very sensitive. We are talking about it. in our debriefing about the pictures, about what the world will see. But in this case, and I spoke with these people, there was no other option.
Thank you. So David Hacham, I want to ask you a little bit about the point that actually Chuck has made. Are Hamas masters of the media? Do Hamas know exactly how to gin up and how to cause unrest on the Temple Mount for those pictures to then be distributed throughout the international media? And do you agree with Chuck that perhaps Israel might have played into Hamas's hands by way of the pictures that came out from the dispersal of the crowds there up on the Temple Mount?
First of all, in principle, this is one of the main targets of Hamas. I'm speaking about Hamas both in Gaza and outside Gaza, in order to foment trouble, in all fronts surrounding the state of Israel. As regards to what happened in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, there are some, remarks and speculations that if the policemen would have, behaved in a more efficient and not, I would say, attacking way to the Muslim believers, to the Muslim that prayed inside the mosque, maybe this event won't happen. But at the same time, this is only, semantics. I think that at the end of the day, those youngsters, those Palestinian youngsters that were concentrated inside the mosque, at the end of the day, they wanted to have clashes with the Israeli policemen. And I think that at the end of the day, this is what we were witnessing in the Temple Mount area. By the way, this is one of the main, I would say, targets of Hamas, to see trouble and to see disorder and to see attacks against Israel. This is one of the fronts, because we have other fronts as well. In addition to the Gaza Strip area, we have the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and the activities, the operations of Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria, vis-a-vis Israeli targets inside the green lines as well. And we are now witnessing a new attempt by Hamas to open a new front and to surround Israel from all angles, not only the Gaza Strip, not only the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, not only East Jerusalem, and not only the Arab sector inside Israel, but now the Lebanese front. This is like a reminder to us. This is something that we have to take into consideration in the future.
So I'm going to talk about the Lebanon front with regard to Hamas in just a moment, but I do want to just ask a quick question of Alon, and then Chuck, I'm coming to you about this other issue. Alon, on Friday, there was an Italian tourist who was killed. His name was Alessandro Parini, and he was killed on the Tel Aviv promenade. He was killed by an alleged attacker who was an Israeli citizen named Abu Jaber, who was 45 years of age. And that individual had no prior record of terrorism or violence. And his body is actually, he was subdued at the scene. His body is actually now subject potentially to an autopsy to rule out the influence of drugs or alcohol or any other factor. This is someone who, by all accounts, was in pretty good standing in Israel. He worked as a janitor in Kiryat Ono. And I'm wondering whether or not what took place there was actually a terror attack. It was a car ramming, to be clear. A car careened into the crowd and killed this Italian tourist and injured several others. But there seems to be a bit of dissonance here, Alon. The Israeli National Police and the Shin Bet have said that this is being investigated as a terror attack, but there are others who seem to think that this may have just been a dreadful accident. Do you have any insight on that at all?
I don't have any new information. I know that the Israeli police and the Shin Bet, the Shabak, are investigating it as a terror attack. I didn't hear, I heard some rumors about other options, but everybody is talking about a terror attack. it's not the first time that Israeli Arabs are involved in terrorism, unfortunately. And it's emphasized the need of gather information, intelligence, how complicated the situation here in Israel. We are living together with the Arab people. We are living together. We are working together. I'm working in Kiryat Ono. He was working in Kiryat Ono. It's very complicated, and that's the huge challenge here in Israel when we are dealing with terrorists. A man getting up in the morning decide to like a lone wolf to attack, and you cannot do anything about it.
And presumably that investigation will lead to where it will lead, and the factors behind what took place there will be determined in due course. So let's turn a little bit now to the rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, and I want to come to you, Chuck. The IDF said that 44 launches have taken place from the Gaza Strip towards Israel, and they were a combination of rockets and anti-aircraft missiles. They broke down in the following way, Chuck. According to IDF statistics, 9 of the rockets failed to cross the border and fell short in the Palestinian Arab enclave. 12 were fired toward the sea. 14 landed in open areas. 1 landed in a populated area in the southern city of Sderot, and 8 were intercepted by the Iron Dome air defense system. Now, a mother of a 9-year-old girl there, whose home was hit overnight by a rocket, told the Israeli media that she intended now to move away from the city with her family due to the bombardment. And she actually said that she, and I'm quoting her statement, does not wish to raise my daughter in a situation that destroys her mental health as early as at the age of 9 months. So, Chuck, tell us a little bit about what we can see here from the Gaza Strip. I'll then come to Lebanon. What is the message that Hamas is sending by way of this latest barrage, and do you see it escalating?
Whether it's going to escalate or not depends on how both sides play it. At the moment, and I stress the word moment, it looks like everyone, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Israel, have decided to put a cap on things and let this round pass. And that's typical of what's happened over half a dozen major operations and a number of more limited ones in the last decade or so. Look, the situation we face on all of the fronts, and Dudu was talking about them, is unacceptable. Okay? What country is willing to live with terrorist organizations, and they're not even terrorist organizations anymore, they're sub-state actors, certainly Hezbollah, Hamas, with ongoing terrorism against civilians, well, terrorism by definition is civilians, but ongoing murder. And the answer is that no normal state would agree to that. And part of the problem is that to a certain extent, we've even become used to it over the years. That's part of the horror. And we, or at least I'll speak for myself, almost expected of our enemies. My expectations of them, my moral expectations are so low that I'm never surprised, no matter how heinous the crime. Now, a lot of people in Israel, people who I tend to think of as being Friday night armchair strategists, demand a strong response. And let's put an end to this for once and for all. Let the IDF do its work. No restraints or constraints. And I suggest that they take a deep breath and cool down. Because if the IDF had a good response to this, we would have done it 100 times over by now. The problem is that no one in Israel, left to right that I know of, except for a few on the ultra fringes, really wants to go and reoccupy Gaza or wants to occupy Lebanon. We really need an occupation of a few million more people. I mean, we need that like a hole in the head, right? We've got enough trouble with the occupation in the West Bank. Call it whatever, or liberation, whichever term you wish to use. But the situation is difficult enough. And let's say at some point, the price may become so heavy in disruption to life, in lives, that we will decide enough is enough, time to go and at least temporarily occupy the Gaza Strip, temporarily occupy Southern Lebanon. And then in the Lebanese case, the estimates are somewhere up to maybe a year to go house to house and root out all of the rockets. In Gaza, it'll just be, 3 to 6 months. That's a guesstimate at the moment. This is the bloodiest type of fighting there is for everyone. It's a horror. The logistical supply chains are targeted all the time. No one in a position of responsibility in Israel wants to do that. Again, the point may come where we decide we have no choice. But until that time comes, we don't have a good offensive response to this. And that's why what we've been playing for the last 20 years, or a little bit less since the withdrawal from Gaza, and actually before then, under governments of a more leftist bent, let's say the Olmert government, and a more right-wing bent, under Likud governments, everybody has repeatedly launched operations designed simply to gain some time until the next round. And I don't think anything has changed. So my heart as an individual goes out, I can't tell you how strongly, to the woman in Sderot who does not want to bring up her daughter in that way. None of us want to live in this kind of situation. The residents of the greater Gaza area have had to do so for a long time now. In the 80s and 90s, the residents of the north had to do so. And all of Israel had to do so during the years of the Intifada. And of course, previously, that is tragically part of the Israeli reality.
David, I'm going to come to you in just a moment to talk a little bit more about Hamas in Lebanon. But before I do, Alon, you are, I remind our listeners, the former Deputy Commissioner of the Israeli National Police, and you are a counter-terror expert. And you made mention, Chuck has just spoken a little bit about the external threats that surround us. You made mention of the domestic tensions that exist in Israel, including within the Israeli Arab sector, which was for a long time thought of as a great success story within the story of Israel, their integration and so forth. And I'm wondering what Israel can do more to keep its citizens safe from that emerging threat. Now, I know that you are a proponent of the National Guard, of bringing about a National Guard. We saw during the recent negotiations as Prime Minister Netanyahu stepped away or put a temporary pause on the judicial reform. We saw that Minister Ben-Gvir, the Minister for Domestic Security, has been promised his own National Guard, approximately 1,800 members strong, that would be under his, I don't know if under his command, but certainly under his ministry, within his ministry. Do you think that is a positive development? Do you think that will help to curb the threat of terrorism domestically? Should Minister Ben-Gvir, in your opinion, have control of such a force? And do you think that we'll see it actually come about in the near term?
First of all, my own opinion that the National Guard is something which is very important and it must be established. But, with a huge but, in no way under the command of the Israeli Minister for Public or for Internal Security, under Ben-Gvir, and not under any other Minister of Internal Security. This National Guard, or how we call it, the Israeli Guard, must be under the command of the Israeli National Police. I won't go about all the details why, by the chain of command must be one. There is no way that a politician will be in charge of operational force, and he will not. There is no way that a politician will give orders and commands to an operational force. So that's my opinion, and I think this voice is being louder and louder here in Israel. The National Guard must be under the Israel National Police. That's for the National Guard. And regarding the threats that we are facing now from inside and outside, I think that we are in a very unique situation. I don't remember a situation like that in the past, where we have fronts from Lebanon, from Syria, from Gaza, from the Judea Samaria, from East Jerusalem. And you can add to that the international front and the pressure that the international community is putting on Israel. And there are several threats, not only fronts. There are missiles, drones, terrorism, all kinds of terror attacks, from stabbing to car ram to shootings. You have huge riots in the Palestinian cities and the Israeli Arab cities like Nazareth and so on. And today we faced a cyber attack on some of the facilities here in Israel. So it's a unique situation, several fronts, several threats. And I really agree with Chuck. We have to be very smart and we have to go step by step. And I think that the first step will stop the process of changing the laws here in Israel to calm down the situation inside the country and to deal with the security issues.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to Chuck in just a moment, but I do want to address myself to you, David. David, you're somebody who has been intimately involved in the process of targeted killings in the past, including in the Gaza Strip, but not limited to. And I want to give you a quote that was put forward by the mayor of Sderot, Alon Levavi. And Levavi said the following when assessing Israel's response to the rocket fire coming from the Gaza Strip. He said, quote, "We must put it on the table. There are no dead terrorists in Gaza. This means that this policy of granting immunity to terrorists who are making our lives miserable is continuing. To change this equation, we must do other things. It's time for the government and the Prime Minister to adopt a policy of eliminating them," meaning the terrorists who are at the helm of the activities of Hamas. Do you think that Israel's response inside Gaza was sufficient on this occasion? Chuck described it. Chuck, I can't remember the exact phrase, but you said something like, let this round sort of come to an end or put a lid on this current round. Hasn't really been a very strong response. A couple of tunnels were hit and a rocket and munitions factory was hit, but nobody has paid the price for the launch of rockets towards Israel.
Yeah.
David, do you think...
You're perfectly right, but...
Do you think we need to go back to that policy?
I have to say there's something very much important in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the war, the campaign, the Israeli military campaign against Hamas in Gaza is to be taken into consideration in the framework of all the strategic, I would say, challenges facing Israel today. And Israel has to take into consideration all these challenges. And I think that when I'm looking to the strategic environment in which Israel is in existence, I think that number one challenge facing Israel today, and as a matter of fact, in the last 10 or more years, is Iran and the attempts by the Ayatollah's regime in Tehran to develop nuclear military capabilities. We shouldn't forget this challenge. This is number one. And all the other challenges are not, I would say, at the same level from the Israeli point of view. Now, as regard to Gaza, I think that what Israel did in Gaza, the retaliation against the rockets that were carried out from Gaza against the Israeli side, was enough. We don't need to open now a new front vis-a-vis Hamas in Gaza. As a matter of fact, of course, I know the strategy of Hamas to keep the Gaza Strip silent with no, acts against the Israeli side in order to open a new front in South Lebanon and in order to make provocations in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, in East Jerusalem. And of course, don't forget the Arab sector in Israel prior to the 67 borders. But at the same time, I think that Israel has to manage and to calculate all the threats and to put, what is more serious and have to be tackled, and what is less serious and less, I would say, important now. In any case, I'm with you, Benjamin, that, I was for 8 years in the Gaza Strip. I served as an officer in Gaza. And as a matter of fact, I was in the Minister of Defense Bureau with many ministers. And we used the targeted killings as a way in order to ease the tension and to work against Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. I think this is a tool. This is like a target that we have to take into consideration in the future. And all the leaders of Hamas inside Gaza, they have to know that they are target for targeted killings by Israel. And this is something that can make, that can influence in a better way the situation in the Gaza Strip. But in all, when I'm looking to all the challenges facing Israel today, I think that number one challenge is Iran and the nuclear capabilities that they would like, the Ayatollah's regime would like to develop in the future.
Well, I agree with you, David, but the only thing is, I don't think anyone's disputing that. I think that everybody understands that Iran is the number one strategic priority for the state of Israel to counter. But the state of Israel has to be able, for one of a more elegant phrase, to walk and to chew gum at the same time. And when you have these conflagrations coming from the Gaza Strip, and now those are joined by rocket fire from Lebanon, from Southern Lebanon, which I'm going to come to you about, Chuck, in just a moment, I don't think that one can continue to give a muted response on those two fronts, because we're busy watching what's going on in Iran with their nuclear weapons pursuit. I think that there actually does need to be a stronger response on both fronts. And it actually raises, this is my opinion, it raises this question for you, Chuck. And just to give our listeners a bit of context, over the course of this weekend, 34 rockets were fired toward the border, the Israeli border, with 5 landing inside Israel, 4 with unknown impact sites, and the rest were downed by Iron Dome. Now, these rockets were fired by Hamas in Lebanon, not by Hezbollah. And now I see that Ismail Haniyeh and Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, so Haniyeh of Hamas, Nasrallah of Hezbollah, they have met to discuss what's been reported as cooperation this morning about how to deal with attacking the state of Israel. Let's call it what it is. I would rather suggest that the discussion was not about cooperation, but there might be the beginnings of a power struggle, or the intensification of a power struggle between Hamas in southern Lebanon and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So, look, Chuck, such a significant barrage of rocket fire has not come about since the 2006 Second Lebanon War. David spoke about the Iranian threat. Both of these parties, Hamas and Hezbollah, are proxies of Iran. What should Israel do in response to the rocket fire from southern Lebanon? How concerned should we be by the opening of this front by Hamas in southern Lebanon? And are we worried about giving too strong a response against Hamas in southern Lebanon, lest we should awaken the, let's call it what it is, the power of Hezbollah in the same area?
Look, first of all, let me say, I don't want to be misunderstood based on what I said before. I'm all for offensive action, aggressive offensive action, when a couple of conditions pertain. First of all, when we really believe that we can achieve something significant. Okay, if it's just another 3 months or 6 months of quiet, it's not worth it. The number of guys we're going to lose in the operation, and I hate to speak in cynical numbers, but it's lives. The number of guys we're going to lose, the number of civilians we'll lose in their counterattacks, doesn't justify it. Remember, Hezbollah is thought to have somewhere up to 150,000 rockets. This is a mammoth arsenal. It is unparalleled in the world. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad only have a few tens of thousands of rockets. Okay? To overstate the case just a little bit, almost every home in the state of Israel is going to be hit when the big one happens. So we have to choose our timing very carefully. One, when we can do something effective. In other words, gain a significant period of time. And secondly, apropos what David was saying, it has to be in the appropriate strategic circumstances. And I don't think that our circumstances today could be less conducive to a significant operation than they are. Let's remember, we all have short memories. I mean, life in Israel is very, very intense. Just a week or 10 days ago, we were afraid that the IDF and defense establishment were about to come apart at the seams. Half of the public of the state of Israel was rising up in revolt against, or at least in opposition, to the government. And we are in a state of a temporary pause. And it may start again in about a week, 2 weeks from now. Israeli society is simply on the verge of coming apart. That's not the way to fight a war. Secondly, our economy, which was great 3 months ago, has nosedived. In particular, the high-tech sector. That's the engine of growth. We need them. It is critical for defense purposes. That's what funds much of Israel's defense capabilities. Our relationship with the United States, and here I would change our current order of priorities. Yes, of course, Iran is a military threat. So from that point of view, it's number one. But the relationship with the United States is, to my way of thinking, one of the two most important things to Israel's security, even before Iran. We need the US for everything, for Iran, for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for regional normalization, for hopefully someday peace, for our international standing, everything. And we are in the midst of a crisis, which I think was going to happen in any event, and which the so-called judicial reforms have greatly exacerbated. And we're in a situation which our enemies, to their credit, have created the danger of a multi-front war. We, partly because the Gulf states have lost confidence in the American guarantee, partly because it's clear to them that we're not an even partial alternative to the US. The Abraham Accords are dissipating, let's put it that way, and hopes for further normalization are off. The last thing we need at the moment is a war. Now, there are always very good arguments for putting off a war or major offensive action, okay? At any time, wise analysts, unlike myself, will give you all sorts of good reasons why it should happen. It shouldn't happen. But these circumstances are really not conducive. Now, you're right, the few tens of rockets that came out of Lebanon now, the biggest volley since the Lebanon War of 2006. On the other hand, we've had 17 years of almost complete quiet. When the 2006 war had ended, had you told me that we would have 17 weeks of quiet, I'd have been impressed. If you said 17 months, I'd have been thrilled. We've had 17 years. Yes, it's not just, I think this is absolute coordination between Hezbollah and Hamas. It's been building for a few years. There have already been a couple of Hamas-inspired incidents out of Lebanon over the last couple of years. And now I think the level of coordination, I would imagine, is very, very deep. Someday, at some point, we may have to address this. Now isn't the time.
Okay, so with that having been said, David, I'm going to come to you first, and then Alon, I want to ask you about the domestic resilience that we have in Israel, because I think that really is a very important perspective to add on to what Chuck just said. But prior to you, Alon, David, tell us very quickly, in short form, if you would, Hamas's presence in southern Lebanon. Are we going to see that growing? Are we going to see more firing of rockets and munitions towards Israel from that particular front? And why is it that they now feel capable of dispersing themselves not only from their headquarters in the Gaza Strip, but now to a different enclave, namely southern Lebanon?
As a matter of fact, the presence of Hamas in Lebanon is not only for the last period of time, last year or two. It's more than 1 year or two. They are now making a base in Lebanon. They are working in a very cooperative way and coordinated way with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And I would like to tell you in this regard something very much important. I don't think that Hamas could make these rockets, firing against Israel without coordination and without having, the consent and the agreement of Hezbollah in Lebanon. They wouldn't do it independently. They are totally dependent on Hezbollah, and I think that Hezbollah gave them the green light in order to do this campaign, this rocket campaign, rocket firing against the state of Israel. Now, I think to a large extent that after what happened during the last couple of days, I mean, the rocket, firing from Lebanon, that now Hezbollah knows that this is another potential front in order to target and to challenge the state of Israel. As I've told you before, it's in addition to the fronts in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, the Arab sector inside Israel, and now in Lebanon. This is a new front that Hamas is not going to abandon. Maybe in the prevailing circumstances, Hamas and Hezbollah would decide that this is the end of this, tense situation today. But in the future, I think that Israel has to take it into very important point of view. I mean, that Lebanon can be another front for Hamas, in addition, of course, to Hezbollah in Lebanon, that Chuck spoke about it beforehand. This is another front that we have to take into serious consideration in the future. And I think that what I think is behind all what happened in Lebanon is to circle Israel, to make like a circle of Israel in all fronts. And this is something very much serious from the Israeli point of view. And again, I agree to what has been said before, that this is not the proper time for Israel to wage another war. Israel has to make a war against its enemies in the proper time for Israel. This is not the proper time now. And I think at the end of the day, as I've told you before, number one threat in the strategic, level is Iran and the nuclear capabilities that Iran would like to develop at the end of the day.
So thank you for that perspective, David. I just want to say, of course, as we all know here, all of us have served and you gentlemen have served at the highest echelons of service. The reality that we all know, of course, is that war is visited upon us not at a time of our choosing, not at a time of our choosing. So it's all very well as saying this is the right time, this is the wrong time. Not necessarily will it be to our decision-making when war is visited upon the state of Israel. But I want to ask you, Alon, 2 points that I want you to weigh in on. The first is I want you to speak. You are an expert, you are a lecturer on Chosen Leumi, on domestic national resilience. It's really within your wheelhouse. Chuck's made a point about how less than desirable the timing would be for Israel to launch a major operation, defensive operation. David has underscored the very same point. They haven't really spoken about some of the constraints and some of the difficulties that we would have domestically in that sense. How fraught do you think Israel's domestic picture is right now? And do you feel that on the home front, Israel is geared up and ready in the case that a war should be visited upon us? Do you feel that this is a time when our citizens, civilians are at their best in order to sustain such a reality, in order to show that national resilience for which we've become fabled around the world, unfortunately as a consequence of repeated war, but our ability to rise to those challenges?
I think that our enemies, it won't be smart from their side to mistake about the resilience of the Israelis, and even in this in the situation that we are in right now. I think that if the Israelis will face a real threat it's not that there are no threats right now, but I mean a major threat like a war or a major attack, I think all the Israelis will stand together and everyone will go and do his reserve service as myself, as a pilot or anybody else. And I don't see that the Israelis will break in this situation, but the situation in Israel now, in the society of Israel, is tearing apart. There's the huge argument between right and left. There are hundreds of thousands of people on the streets demonstrate against the government, and there are hundreds of thousands of people that believe that the government is doing the right things. So there is a huge argument here in Israel. I'm not sure that we are in our best right now. I really agree with Chuck and David that this is not the right time for Israel to go to war or to go to any adventure like this. We have to look at the whole picture. I believe that the decision makers, and I saw that the Benjamin Netanyahu just met today with the head of the opposition, with Yair Lapid, and they have to be very smart, very calm, to take and to look at the whole picture from Iran to Gaza, from the West Bank to Lebanon. It's all one big picture. The domestic terrorists and the riots in the Arab cities, it's all the same story. And we have to be very smart and not work from our stomach, but from our brain. And to do it very calm. Regarding the resilience of the people of Israel, I think in the right moment, they will all stand together and face these challenges, even though that now it's one of the most challenging moments in the Israeli society. I visited my daughter. She's serving as a soldier next to the Gaza Strip. I just visited her base 2 days ago. And I can tell you it was just after the missile attack on the settlements surrounding the Gaza Strip. And I can tell you that people were traveling, people were going out. The same thing in the north. It's amazing. I think Chuck just said it before. We got used to this situation for the best and the worst. But I see people that are still doing their daily things like traveling, touring, shopping, and so on. So I think the resilience of the Israeli people is strong, and it's under a big challenge right now.
Thank you. So I only have a couple of minutes longer, and I'm going to come to you, Chuck, about the following. Our old pal Erdogan from Turkey has seen the situation, and he has said that the Islamic community in its entirety ought to now join forces to condemn. Now, I want to emphasize, he said to condemn. He's not calling for a war, but to condemn the state of Israel. Now, this is a country with which we've had a recent something of a rapprochement with, and this is a country to which the Prime Minister was required to make an apology after the events of the Mavi Marmara. If you remember, that apology was presided over by then President Barack Obama during Obama's visit to Israel. How viable is this notion of the Islamic world now setting its differences apart in order to condemn, and then perhaps more than condemn, the state of Israel? And where do we put this Erdogan in all of this picture? This surely is just an out-and-out anti-Semitic foe of the Jewish state, is he not? He's Kaman Mast. We understand what we're dealing with there. Can you give us a little bit of insight about that?
Well, first, let me just say that you made an important comment before, which is that Israel cannot choose the timing of its wars. It is, first of all, dictated by our enemies, but we can choose the opportune time for us to respond. And there is no immediate requirement that we do so today. I don't believe that deterrence will be harmed if we wait a few weeks or a few months. We can always find the circumstances that will justify the attack when we're ready for it. Look, Erdogan, I agree with you, is an anti-Semite. Quite simple. And I, for one, think that it was a mistake to apologize, even though I thought that restoring relations with Turkey was of vital importance. Turkey's a big country, not just geographically, it's got a big population, 80-something million people. It's a NATO member, which is located in an extraordinarily important region. It borders on the Middle East, on Western Asia, on Europe. It's right there. It's a U.S. ally, sort of. A major trading partner to this day of Israel's. I still think that apologizing was a mistake. We had nothing to apologize for. If anyone should have apologized, it should have been the Turks, and they were the ones who wanted this rapprochement at the time or needed it more than we did. The Middle Eastern landscape has been changing considerably in the last few months. Many people are familiar with the rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians now. The Saudis and the Iranians brokered by China. And there was a rapprochement between the UAE and Iran a few months before that. And there's talk now that Egypt may be next. And Egypt is improving its relations with the Turks. The Saudis are improving their relations with the Turks. Half of the Arab world is in the process of restoring or beginning to think about restoring ties with Assad in Syria, a man who has slaughtered maybe 600,000 or more of his own people. The landscape is changing. And again, Turkey is a very important player there. It is important that we have as good a miserable relationship as we can with them. But as long as Erdogan is in power, I don't see that there's much room for significant improvement, and we just have to swallow hard. And I would answer him in kind.
So I said that was my last question, but there's something I'd actually like. Very short responses, if I could. I'm sorry to have to work to the time constraints, because I know each of you could give a full seminar on any of the subjects we've touched upon. There's something that really always bothers me, and I imagine it bothers our listeners as well. Why do we accept in Israel that at this time of year, during Ramadan, there is going to be violence, there is going to be terrorism, there is going to be intimidation? It is going to happen within the borders of the state of Israel. And to all intents and purposes, it seems that we just have to deal with it and react to it. And I'd like to ask you, Alon, to go first on that. Why is this? I mean, can you imagine a situation, for example, whereby Christians in the United States were to say that it's the holy period of Christmas and there's going to be violence and terrorism and God knows what? This would not be suggested. Certainly would it not be accepted? Why do we accept this reality in Israel? Do we not have a choice in this matter? Do we not have some agency? And then the same to you, David, very briefly, and then we'll probably round out the conversation there.
I think it's unacceptable.
But it is accepted, Alon. It does seem to be accepted, right?
It is happening, but it's unacceptable. And I can tell you that a few years ago, while I was the head of operations in the Israeli police, the Ramadan was quiet. It just the last few years that we see year after year that the Ramadan became a major event for like opportunity for the Hamas and for the other terror organization to attack Israelis wherever they are, and they are using this holy holiday for both the Christians, the Muslims, and Jewish people as an opportunity to try to make a chaos inside Israel. And I remember years that it was a quiet Ramadan, like if you compare it to this Ramadan and the Ramadan last year, which was with missile attacks on Jerusalem. We have a short memory, as Chuck said before. It's unacceptable. We have to think in a different way, I think, for the future. I think that we need to do some aggressive things to avoid such an event in the next year. We have to think out of the box. It's unacceptable. We have to think differently.
David Hacham, your last word on this issue, please.
Yes. First of all, I would like to say that on the basis of my military service, 30 years in the IDF, and later on advisor for Arab affairs to 7 ministers of defense, I think that on this experience, on the basis of my experience, Israel, even if we are speaking about the sensitive time of Ramadan right now, the holy month of Ramadan, when Israeli citizens are in danger, Israel will take the necessary steps in order to frustrate any aggression, any terrorist operation against Israeli civilians. This is something that we have done in the past, and I think that despite, the very sensitive period of time that we are passing now, this is, I think, the mode of behavior, the way that Israel should and would behave in the future vis-a-vis all the challenges facing us in the area.
Well, thank you very, very much to all of you. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you for tuning into the situational briefing, whether you're watching it live or whether you're listening to the podcast or watching it on JBS. We appreciate you giving your time and attention on behalf of myself and my colleagues at the MirYam Institute. We appreciate all of the insight that you've been able to provide us with. And of course, we pray for and look forward to days of knowing peace in Israel domestically, and of course, peace from beyond our borders, so that we may enjoy our rightful place in the community of nations. Thank you very much. And I wish all of you Moadim L'Simcha for the rest of Passover.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.